Welcome, welcome, welcome to the audience here in the center, but also to all our colleagues in the audience online. Welcome to the people here and to this distinguished panel online and here. My name is Katja Iversen. I'll be your moderator, instigator, timekeeper, and troublemaker in this great panel from gender blind to gender just, time to commit to Nordic climate leadership. The event is created and co-hosted with the Nordic Council of Ministers for Gender Equality and LGBTI and organized together with the Trade Council Denmark and the SUNY Global Center. It'll be fast, it'll be furious, and it'll be fabulous. It will be solution focused, and it will bring forward concrete commitments to action from all of the participants, commitments linked to the Gender Equality Forum Action Coalition, and commitment building on a roundtable that we had in Norway, in Oslo in January, and commitment that will put forward the course for change. We had, from the meeting in Norway came out 22 takeaways. I know that our minister host, the co-chair, will send them a bit, but you can also be found on northern.org. And I also think it might be in your bags. The event in January and events to come. It's part of creating a greater Nordic alliance on gender and climate and raising the level of collaboration, coordination, knowledge, solutions, and not least action. That was discreet. Before introducing the the panel and giving the floor to the chair of the Nordic Council, Minister of Gender and LGBTI, to kick us off, I will ask all of you in the room and online to help us make some noise. Please tweet your hearts out or use LinkedIn with the hashtag Nordic Equality, hashtag CSW66, and if you can fit it in, hashtag Climate Justice, then it's more power to it. But also, please send your questions to the panel using the hashtag Nordic Equality. We won't open for the floor, but that's how we take the questions. So with that, I just want very quickly to introduce the panel. We have Gudmundur Ingi Gudbrandsson, Minister of Social Affairs and Labour Market from Iceland and Minister of Nordic Cooperation. Eva Nordmark, Minister for Employment and Gender Equality in Sweden. Trine Bramsen, Minister of Transport and Minister for Gender Equality Denmark. And Thomas Blomqvist, Minister for Nordic Cooperation and Equality from Finland. And also with us here, we have Gro Lindstad, Executive Director for Focus from Norway. And good to see you all here present and online. And because this is one of the wonderful hybrids events that we have now learned that we can easily do, we have Naaja, Nathanielsen, Minister of Finance, Mineral Resources, Justice and Gender Equality from Greenland. And I just have to note, please note that they put gender equality under the Minister of Finance. Inspiration. Sólvit Nolsøe, Minister of Social Affairs from the Faroe Islands. And last but not least, Annette Trettenbergstuen, Minister of Culture, Equality Norway. And she's also the chair of the Nordic Council for Minister of Gender Equality and LGBTI. And she's going to kick us off right now. Annette, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Katja. They're all, both the viewers and listeners worldwide and the audience present in New York. I really wish I could be with you today. This year's main topic for our meetings in the UN is climate and gender equality. Before we start to discuss gender just climate policies, allow me to address the war going on in Ukraine. We are in the midst of an illegal, full-scale war on the European continent. The scope of the tragedy being played out in Ukraine is difficult to grasp, making it even more demanding to keep focus on quieter and slower moving challenges. We cannot, however, allow ourselves to forget this year's main topic for the Commission on the Status of Women, and acknowledging climate change as perhaps the biggest threat to our lives and livelihoods. It fuels hunger, loss of nature, conflict and poverty, and it undermines our past achievements and future efforts in international development. The UN Women has asked the Nordic countries to be even more active in order to promote gender equality, both in our own region and also globally. It's a great pleasure for me, as the chair of the Nordic Corporation, to wish you all welcome to our Nordic panel debate called From Gender Blind to Gender Just, Time to Commit to the Nordic Climate Leadership. The Nordic countries have always been firm and engaged supporters of the UN. It's also important for the Nordic region to be a constructive partner in order to solve the challenges that the world faces today and in the future. The UN Commission on the Status of Women gives us a unique possibility to meet and to discuss important issues. In 2020, 25 years after the Beijing conference, UN Women launched Generation Equality, an initiative with 6 action coalitions. At the same time, UN Women urged the Nordic countries to commit to gender equality, and so we did. This year's main topic for the CSW66 is climate and gender equality. And before we start discussing gender just climate policies, allow me to confirm that the Nordic countries are ready to commit jointly to press for progress for Action Coalition for Feminist Action for Climate Justice. We will revert to this commitment later during this panel debate, so I will leave it at that. Over to you again, Katja.
Thanks a lot. And I just need to hear if my mic is on. I should take the other one. Anthony? I will take this one. So thanks a lot. And constructive partners and collaboration, I really like to hear that. It is good that the Nordics are so good at gender in general, not that they are done yet. And they are pretty good at climate too, not that they are done yet. But combining the two has not really been a big issue yet. Changing that. We're going to have 2 big panel discussions. And the first one is on gender and sustainable lifestyles. The next one is on how we get a green, gender equal, sustainable labor market. And after those 2, we're going to talk about commitment, because no event like this without commitment and without commitment to action. So for each of the discussions, we have some start discussions, and then the rest of the panel will get to chip in, both from online and here. And we will also take a couple of questions from the audience via Twitter or via Facebook Live, where you are also all featured right now. The first, gender and sustainable lifestyles. So women and men and other genders are affected differently by climate change. They are affected differently by climate change policies, but they also respond differently and take action in various ways and different ways to curb global warming. Lifestyle choices are different. Men and women, there's a big study out that shows that men and women eat differently with different climate impacts. They transport differently, and they also choose solutions differently. Roughly said, and sometimes you have to paint with a big brush, men go for technological fixes and women go for community and behavior, community collaboration and behavior change. And also, let's not forget that men sit at all the big decision-making tables. Women are often not invited in, but in the streets with the young people. So gender should be cross-cutting. And if we don't take gender into account when we make climate policies and when we make the big decisions, if we don't make that gender analysis, we are going to fail on both gender equality and climate change and curbing climate change. So, dear panelists, how do we best address the gendered patterns related to consumption and transportation and technological solutions? And why do we need to do it now and fast? So Thomas, may I start with you? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you said, the climate change affects people in different ways, and it affects women, men, and genders in different ways, and we have to take that into account when we are making decisions. And the decisions needed to tackle the climate change, they should happen now. They maybe should have happened yesterday, but at least we have to make them now. And we have to have women and girls as collaborators, as decision makers, because of the reason you just mentioned. Because if we don't do it that way, then the solutions we come up with and the decisions we are making will not be effective enough, and they will not treat people in a equal way. So there's a short answer to your question.
That was great. Thank you very much. Thanks. And Trine, if I may, yeah, we have decided that we're on first names. I hope that's okay with you. So it is Nordic. So Trine, you're also the Minister for Transportation, and choices and lifestyle, whether health, whether transportation, whether food, talk to us about that. How do we take that into consideration, and how will you do it?
Interesting question. And yes, it's true. I'm also Minister of Transportation, and therefore I've been visiting a lot of bus companies during the last weeks, and they really want female drivers. And why do they want that? Well, because they use less gasoline. And I think that's also an interesting perspective on and actually they also save drivers, they tell me. So I think it's quite interesting and a different perspective. But on the question whether we are gender blind or not, I don't think we are blind, because it means that we can't open our eyes. We will never see it. So I think we just have closed our eyes, and we need to open them. And there's much to see. First of all, how it affects women, longer to water. It's more difficult to get food to the family, and we also see refugees and so on. But also how, and I think that's might be even more interesting. How can women influence the climate crisis? It's both the technical development. Yesterday, I was in a debate where one said that the washing machine is not good for the environment, and that's a fair point. But I don't think it's good for the women if we don't have our washing machines. So I think the solution must be that we develop new ways of washing clothes, and we use the technology to find new ways to develop that, and also that we let the women into the decision making, because we are a strong part of this, and also that we give girls and women more rights. As an answer to the climate crisis, we know that education and family planning and the right to abortion is important tools. So I think it's also those who don't think women should have rights, because women should have more rights. Maybe the climate change can make them change their mind.
Great point. Thank you for bringing up rights, because we cannot, we are standing in front of a big crisis, but we can't let go of rights, which actually makes me go to you, Bo Lindstad from Focus. So when we kind of look at lifestyles and what we need to do, we also need to look at rights. Would you talk a little about the gendered lifestyles and what we need to both do, but also be aware of not doing?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm really happy that the CSW this year is tackling climate change with a gendered perspective. And being from civil society, I would say it's about time. And I think that for too long, government, civil society, and also within civil society have been too siloed. Environment organizations too seldom work with a gendered perspective, and women's organizations do not talk enough to environment organizations so that we join together to promote rights. And too often, as you said, women and girls are left in the corridors and not at the table. The Secretary General this week said that only 15% of the climate ministers in the world are women. And that has consequences, because that has something to do with implementation of national policies, national regulations, and also implementation of frameworks that are there. In some way, I think it's also a paradox that we're sitting here this week at CSW with the main theme as we are. And at the same time, there is a dialogue going on in Geneva on biodiversity and the convention. But as far as I know, there's no connection. So I don't know if that has a gendered perspective to it. So I think if we're talking about rights, we have to become aware of how the rights connect. And then we have to start looking at women as solution multipliers and not just as the beneficiaries, but as agents of change and those who actually are part of pushing for change to frameworks and those who stand in the front lines as human rights defenders on the climate change agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think there's a stat that comes to me. It is 84% of all household consume decisions are made or very much influenced by women. Now, that's something to take into consideration as the agents of change. But also, as we say in global development, it's also the women who have to teach their kids to swim and decide whether they want ducks instead of chickens, because ducks can swim. So, there's some practical on that as well. But let me just open up to the whole panel and ask you also to invite our online friends. How do you as leaders promote sustainable lifestyles? And what tools do you have and use? Naaja, would you start?
Well, yeah, I just would like to make a point also about what you need to change this consumption issue in a more gender diverse way. Well, the Nordic countries, they are a haven for welfare and democracy and equality, but they are also inhabited, the Nordic countries, by people who are used to more, not less. It is societies where consumerism have roots because there's a general high income in those countries. So if you need to change in a more sustainable way, you also need to calibrate your belief systems. So I really think also values is something we need to discuss, and that's not only gendered, but it's also gendered. In Greenland, I think we have our local regions are very differently affected by the climate change. Some areas see a massive change to the negative for the worse, with less ice and less animals, while other regions see openings for new industries. So what the importance in this context is to, from the political side of things, to steer in the new direction and constantly have a focus on both gender and sustainability. That means funding, projects that support sustainability and is gender sensitive. Also, maybe passing new legislation could be a way, because I think we do have a lot of responsibility as politicians, and if values are what we are really moving, we need to change that by also putting some new legislation in place.
Thank you. Sólvit, a comment to this? On what?
Yes, I was trying to unmute my microphone. Now it worked. Sorry. No, I agree with what Naaja said. I believe that a big part of this is to evaluate our values with regards to consumption, and this has been, I think, more in focus of the last few years. That we need to address this. How do we consume? What do we consume? How much do we need? And that's really from both politically we need to address this, but also ourselves as individuals. But what I see as a large part of this, a large part of the solution is, well, I can only speak from my perspective, the Faroese perspective, is really to focus on increasing the amount of women that participate in, for instance, politics, because we know that that women tend to be more concerned with sustainable development, climate change, ecology. I think research has showed this and proved this. So really we need to promote and achieve a higher participation in politics and in companies, boards. We need to be very active and have a constant focus on these areas.
Thanks. Thanks. Gudmundur from Iceland, the most gender equal country in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. We still have a way to go though. So just let me make sure that that's how we look at it in Iceland. I just want to make one general point to begin with, and that's to challenge us all to try to talk about all genders, not only the heteronormative men and women, because there are more groups than that, and I myself am one of those people, as we say. So what I think is crucial in when we are trying to marrying climate change and gender equality is that we go out of the silos, like you mentioned here before, and we start to treat this issue as a true multidisciplinary field. And I come from the environmental NGO world before I entered politics. And you're so right. We did not think too much about gender and the gender movement, not so much about the environment, but we are all friends because we are looking at each other and saying, hey, you did that. And I think we can learn from that. Oh yeah, that's right. And there are so many similarities, but we haven't managed to make these two marry. So since I was the environment minister for 4 years in Iceland, one of the things that we looked at in our climate change action plan in 2020 was to say, hey, okay, now we have these 50 actions or how many there were, but we need a social, economic evaluation and assessment of these actions, and the same for gender. And when I left office, we were sort of halfway with the social economic assessment, but hadn't started on the gender. So I hope the minister that took over my seat will continue with that, because I think only then we will move closer to be able to treat these two issues in a win-win situation rather than the way that we do it today. And that's where you really need to look at how you, and that's sort of your question, how leaders are promoting sustainable lifestyles. This is something that we need to make sure that we look at the same time. In Iceland, we have now for quite many years looked at the budget with the glasses of gender equality. And we are looking at now all legal bills with those same glasses. And my dream is that we do the same with the environment classes, and we have started that a little bit. But I think it will be really important that we do those two simultaneously, because climate change is affecting, like you said at the beginning, the genders differently. And I just want to conclude with saying that I also think, and now I'm gonna mention women specifically, that they need much more to be at the forefront when it comes to climate change. And don't get offended when I say this, but in my experience, women simply care more, not only about the environment, but also about and the understanding is deeper in many cases on how the impacts of climate change are crucial for the welfare of the 21st century.
Thank you. Absolutely. And also, thanks for bringing up the gender budgeting and if I may say, the gender analysis, gender budgeting, and gender auditing. So we also can hold ourselves to account on whether we actually do what we promise. Minister Eva from Sweden.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very important discussion. Some reflections from my side. I think it's important to underline also that it's urgent to stop the fossil emissions and to also to accelerate a green and gender transition, a just green gender transition. Because this is about solidarity with the younger generations. It's also about solidarity with people all over the world. So for me, this is key actually for a better future for all of us, no matter where we live. And the Nordic region, I think that we have a very important responsibility here, because we are together a region with we're very high when it comes to innovation, gender equality, good results for there. We're a global front runner also when it comes to climate action. So it's important that we also see our responsibility, both the problems, but also to point out the opportunities, because I think that the Nordic region really has a lot I dropped the words in English, but I think we really have this huge responsibility for the future, and I think that we can make it. And for me, as a minister of both employment and also gender equality, I see the importance to create new, green and better jobs. And one of the main priorities that our prime ministers pointed out when she was elected some months ago, one of the top priorities is that we need to tackle the climate change. And we will do that by creating new, better green jobs all across.
We have 20 minutes to discuss that in a minute.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. So, well, I can stop there.
Great, thank you.
No,
Yeah,
can I just add
you can.
some point here? When we speak about sustainable lifestyles, I think the importance of social justice is something we need to take on board when we discuss that. And I think that Trine, for example, touched upon that. We need to secure that everyone can choose sustainable lifestyles. And if I take just one concrete example, if I would go from Stockholm to Copenhagen to visit Trine, it is more expensive to go by train than it is to take the airplane. So, I mean, there's a lot of practical challenges, and it's important that we see that social justice, that it's affordable to make the right choices for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks all for bringing up the not just the between sector that we have to kind of take in all sectors, but we also have to have the intersectional and the justice lens to it. Annette, may I throw it over to you to comment on the sustainable lifestyle?
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on something my colleague from Iceland and also Sweden just said. I think it's really interesting that our attitudes towards climate solutions also differ when it comes to gender. And it is so that in general, women are more, we worry more about the impact of climate change, and we are more positive towards changing our own behavior and more supportive when it comes to climate policies than men are. But at the same time, we can see that men in general are more likely to take up new green technologies, such as domestic solar panels or smart home systems. So it's a huge opportunity in this, I can see. And also, I just want to underline what my colleague from Sweden just said, that we have to have the gender glasses on, but also we have to think about social justice when it comes to changing behavior. Because, for one example, the gender pay gap in the Nordic countries implies that, for example, carbon taxes on products will affect women more than men, assuming that men and women are have a similar consumption pattern. And also due to the gendered consumption patterns, taxes on meat and fuel will impact men more. So while all low-income groups are more vulnerable to increases in energy prices, for example. So you have to have not only the gender glasses on, but also think about class and social justice.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And you, Mark, before Gro?
Yeah, thank you. I
Very
just
brief.
wanted to very quickly pick up on what Gudmundur said, and I so agree with you on this and how we have to think outside the heteronormative box and look intersectionally. What I also wanted to say was just two things. One of the things we have to do is when our climate ministers and governments pick people who are going to be along to the delegations to COP, start picking women's organizations and not just environmental organizations, because there has to be a mix. And then just kind of a small point here, we're not going to solve climate change by technology only. It is solved by people. And a lot of those young activists out there are women and young girls. Look at Greta Thunberg and what she has inspired all young girls to be part of. Thank you.
And by the way, young men as well, because they like to be where the young girls are, is what research shows. But yes, absolutely, kind of we need not just a technological fix, but also all the others. We know that we're not going to get it down 2 degrees if we only go for technology. Minister Thomas from Finland, you want?
Yes, thank you. I would like to mention two things that I think, at least for us decision makers, are very, very crucial and important. And the first one is mentioned here before is gender mainstreaming. I remember when I became minister in our government program in Finland, we had this gender mainstreaming as a very important part of the governmental program. And we have tried to do it in budgeting, in every decision making, so we can look into things and try to see how it affects genders in ways. But now that we had this COVID-19 crisis and we have taken measures to tackle the crisis and to recover from it, we can see when we look into it that in this crisis we haven't had a success in gender mainstreaming. So when we face a crisis, it is easily forgotten. And to avoid that, we have to build capacity. We have to have enough knowledge for the officials, for the decision makers, so that the gender mainstreaming becomes a natural part of decision making and in the daily work. And we are not there yet. And the second thing, speaking about technology,
very briefly.
speaking about technology, I agree. It's not the only solution, but it is an important part of the solution. But I think that we should have more women, and also here because I think that then the applications coming out from the technology would be a broader range of them when we have more women in technology. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. More women in tech, all of tech, and transport. Yes. Thanks a lot. I got the questions from Twitter and Facebook, and I think we've already addressed them because it was about the different sectors, how we can involve them. It was about lifestyle choices. So thanks a lot, and please keep sending them. Now we're going to move over to the next theme, which will be the green, gender equal, sustainable labor market. So even though the Nordics consistently are on the top in European and international indexes on the various dimensions of gender equality, there are still challenges that we need to work on. And I also want to say there's still a good little competition going between the Nordic countries on who's in top 10 and who's not. So, but women's labor force participation is higher in the Nordic countries than in many other parts of the world, but the wage difference between the genders remain. Women lift a lot more of the unpaid care work, household work, and that has been even higher now during COVID. And there's still a notion of what is considered men's jobs and women's jobs, whether it's kind of the care economy or it's the STEM, science, engineering, technology, mathematics, etc. So something really needs to be done. And yes, of course, then we kind of spoke about and several brought it up about having a lot more diversity of all kinds in leadership. And this affects people's lifestyle choices. It affects society as a whole, and it has a big consequence on the environment. So, dear panelists, how can we best ensure that a gender equal and diverse labor force, labor market, and that we get that for that green shift? And what are the risks if we don't succeed? And I would like to start with Minister Naaja from Greenland.
Yes, well, thank you. In Greenland, we have a profound gender segregated labor market with men in the fishing industry and women in the heat sector. And it's very difficult to break that down. And of course, it starts on many levels. And I think the obvious being with us starting to rid ourselves of the gender stereotypical assumptions, what boys and girls' spheres of interest are, and that, and also in the institutions that educate people for the kindergarten, schools, sports clubs, and so on. So we get a more diverse way of viewing people instead of gender. But also, I really think we have a problem with an ancient mindset of recruiters that are paired with a sort of resistance to change terms and framework of sectors. In Greenland, we have a mining industry. And the mining industry is really interested in women operating large machines because they are safer and they have fewer accidents. But you are unwilling to change the shifts where people are out at the mine. So you want the women, but you don't want to change the terms in which you get the women in the different sectors. And I think that is an example where everybody has to give something if we have to change this. Also, the fishing industry is always looking for Greenlandic-speaking shipmates, but they fail to attract the girls to the schools, even though Greenlandic girls are outnumbering boys in the educational system. So it really, I think, a way of changing the way you recruit, changing the way you address, you have the terms around your sector. How is it supposed to work? You cannot sit back and say they have to change to accommodate us. We have the sectors have to change.
Thanks a lot. That was very clear. Eva, you started talking about the green labor market, and I
Yes.
also know that you have taken some initiatives on it. Would you talk to us about it?
Yes, thank you very much. I come from a town called Luleå. It's in the north of Sweden, and right now we are planning to be the first fossil-free steel company in the world. So fossil-free production of steel. And at the same time, we see now new battery industries are being created, and a lot of investments in new green technology is taking place all over Sweden, but actually mostly in the north of Sweden. And this is fantastic. It means that we can create a lot of new green jobs for both women and men. We can at the same time handle or tackling the climate changes. And I'm very proud to announce also that we here the coming months are putting to place a new huge reform on the Swedish labor market, which means that if you have been working for 8 years, you will have the opportunity to study to up to 1 year with 80% of your previous income. That's because we see that a lot of jobs disappear in the Swedish economy every year, also before the pandemic. But at the same time, new green jobs are being created. And there's a lack of skills for those jobs. So this is really an opportunity for people to change job, to have lifelong learning. And what we also do here is that we, at the same time, we change our labor law. So we point out that full-time work is the new norm, or is the norm on the Swedish labor market, and part-time job is the presumption. So this is, what do you say? Is it presumption?
Exemption, yeah.
Thank you. So this is actually a reform that brings both security to workers, but it's also key for the green gender just transition. And I think that we need more of reforms, practical reforms, more than talking. So I hope that we also can exchange more between countries. I know that other countries also take action to really make this important transition happening, and that we can learn from each other, because it's urgent. And we need to make sure that both women and men can be part of this just and green gender transition. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Minister Gudmundur from Iceland, how do we make it also a just transition?
Yeah, I think I have to start in Sweden, because I think what you just said, Eva, is an excellent example of one of the things that we need to do exactly when we are considering and thinking about how on earth we are going to do just transition, because we all agree that that is what we need to do. This is what I love about Nordic cooperation, that we share ideas. And this is at the heart of Nordic cooperation. And this is why we do good in many things, although we will always want to do better. And what I want to say is that for our future welfare on this planet, I think there are two fundamental pillars that we need to think about. And one is peace. We are seriously reminded of the importance of now with the horrendous invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And then it's to prevent catastrophic climate change, because these are simply the pillars that are so important to have in place. And the key issue, like you mentioned, Katja, is just transition. That means that we need to involve a wide variety of different stakeholders invite them to the table, like the example that you were talking about, Eva, up in northern Sweden, where you are really dealing with a real example. I think we need to put much more emphasis on re-education and adjustment of the labor market. We need to help people who are going to lose their jobs because of changes that are caused by climate change. We need to help them to take part in the green job revolution. This is going to be fun. It's going to be great. It's going to be great that we are going to have a revolution in creating new jobs because they are green. And we have to look at it that way. We have to look at that solutions need to be attractive to all of us, to all genders. I want to mention two more things.
Very quickly.
Yes, of course, I will do that because you mentioned that you would otherwise be very, that thing, yeah. But what we have seen really during the pandemic is an increase in domestic violence against women and children. And what we need to make sure when climate change keeps on going is that we don't let that happen, that this change, that the fact that more people will be on the run, if we can put it that way, refugees, etc., that we have to take and address this into our climate adaptation strategies. And I'm done now. Maybe a little bit more later.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And if I may go over to Minister Sólvit from the Faroe Islands online. Green,
Yes.
just labor market.
Yeah, I agree with, I think it was Naaja who said that we really need a change in attitude from large part of the sectors as well. What we see here in the Faroes are largely that women are underrepresented in larger companies here in the Faroe Islands. Larger companies who are major contributors to CO2 emissions, but at the same time, they have accepted the challenge, you could say, and they acknowledge that they have a role to play in lowering carbon emissions and taking climate change more seriously. They have adapted they've taken the UN development goals and trying to implement them in the way they run their business. But as I said, at the same time, we see that women are underrepresented in these larger companies. So what we're trying to do, what we're planning to do is activating the larger companies and getting a dialogue about gender equality as well as climate change, and trying and developing a dialogue into and getting their perspective on gender equality and if they're and how they are trying or planning on increasing their workforce with regards to gender equality, because I think this is vital, really. Because as I said before, we see that the more diverse workforce we have, the better results we see with regards to carbon emissions and climate change policies. And one more thing, I think that this is more directed at me as a politician. What we see here in the Faroes is a segregated labor market. Even though we only have 1% unemployment, we still see that the labor market is heavily gender segregated, where women are, you could say, overrepresented in the care sector, and men are overrepresented in production and business, where the technological developments are happening in those sectors, production and business. We see the men overrepresented. So what I think we need, and if anyone has any good ideas on how to achieve this, we need girls to get more active in STEM educations, where these where those jobs are in production and business, and that's what we're trying to do as well, because we still see that girls tend to move towards the care sector, even though it's the other educations are easily accessible to them. We still see that they tend to hover towards the care sector. So what we need to do is possibly incentivize or at least encourage young women towards these STEM educations. So if anyone has some good ideas on how to do that, if they tried it, that would be good.
Good, thank you. Thank you. And I read in relation to some work with the World Economic Forum that I think it was 40% of the jobs we will see in 10 years, we have not even imagined yet. And let's use that as a green opportunity and a great opportunity to really think that in. I'm going to jump to you, Annette.
Thank you, Katja. I just want to agree with my colleague there. We have a great job to do, and also we have to think of it as an opportunity to attract more women to male-dominated sectors, and especially the so-called STEM professions: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And in Norway, we also have a highly gender segregated labor market, but it's the participation of women in the labor market that makes us a rich country. And I think some people tend to think we're rich because of the oil, but the bearer of our great welfare state is actually women's participation in the labor force. So that's good business for a country. I just have to say that. But a gender balanced labor market has been a priority for Norway and also in the Nordic cooperation for many decades. And I also see that the climate change have an impact on the labor market when it comes to gender segregation, because as I mentioned, technology and digitalization will be drivers in the future job market, and climate policies and investments in the green transition tend to create employment in male-dominated sectors, such as energy and construction, industry and transport. So there is actually a risk that gender segregation in the job market can be reinforced by the development. But as I said in the start, we have to use this as an opportunity and face that if we are going to succeed with the green shift, we will need to utilize the entire talent pool, regardless of gender. And this starts with making the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics studies more interesting and more relevant for both boys and girls. And here I think we have a huge job to do.
And again, a super good point in the cross-sector lens that we need to take to this, whether it's education or health, as Trine also brought up, and the technology. We have received some really good questions from the audience. I'm just going to take them. I'm going to take a couple of them, and then I'm just going to open the floor, because several of you have marked. But let's also make sure that we get. So, Indigenous rights are climate justice, and how do you, not just the big you, but you address that in your actions, in your political actions on gender and climate? And then it's not the same, but also as a young climate activist who works to promote space for young women in the workplace and decision-making processes, what would your advice be to me? So you marked before, Gro, I don't know if you would speak to this as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start with how do you include Indigenous women? It's really important that we remember that Indigenous populations and Indigenous women are the ones who every day are at the forefront of fighting climate change, and also on the human rights side, they're the activists who are getting killed, who are getting threatened in rainforests and Amazons who are fighting in the north, the Sami populations, and others. And I think that we need to be more inclusive overall. And my point, if I can add on to just not talking about Indigenous populations, also we have an untapped resource also in the lack of inclusion we have today of women of ethnic minorities in the Nordic countries who have less jobs, and also women with disabilities. If we're going to do something to make this a society for the future, there's no progress for one without progress for all.
And there's no excuse for not doing it.
Never.
Okay. Good advice or comments on let's say both Indigenous, disabled, the whole young people's involvement and being addressed in the climate policies?
Well, I could say something about Indigenous people. We just approved a climate law in Finland. It's a framework, and there I'm proud to say we mentioned the Sami people, and we see them as experts on climate change, and they will be involved in decision making. So it's a good start. We are not there yet, but it is a good start, and I think it's very, very important because they know the best how climate change affect them and their life.
They're the everyday innovators who have to live with it every day. So, you know, their innovations in their own lives are what we could scale.
I think it's important to say that you must organize in civil society, in a trade union, in a political party. And I think there's a huge responsibility for all that are in the leadership, in politics, in civil society and so on, to really make sure that people can be part of the solution. So that's why I say that my most important advice is to organize yourself.
Okay. And Trine, you marked, and then we're going to Naaja afterwards.
Yes, I agree. And then enter politics, and of course sometimes it's a little boring and it takes a very long time. But it is the way to change things. It is the way to change things, and I guess that was also why we all entered into politics many years ago, because we wanted to change something, and it's. We need activists. It's not my point. We need activists, and we need to hear the voices of the activists. But the very good way and direct way to change things is in the political systems. It's what democracy is about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then just one more point, because you mentioned that we have a Nordic competition when it comes to equality, and I must admit that Denmark has been sleeping for 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more, but we're back again. And we just decided to have the gender balance targets for all both private and public companies, and I think as one of my colleagues said, it's a really important step because it's also the direct way to have women all over.
So Denmark won't be number 29 next year.
And I think in
WEF list
111,
100 and number 4 in terms of economic participation. Yes,
we're back.
Good. You got your work cut out for you. Naaja.
Well, yes, I just want to say it's a great question about Indigenous women. I attended a forum yesterday for Indigenous women in leadership, and I really think this has to do with the power structure and intersectionality, because already a lot of things are happening in the Indigenous communities, and already Indigenous women are doing a lot of stuff to raise alarm about climate change and find new solutions. But what they need is funding, I think was very clear yesterday, and it's a platform. They are already elected leaders that are not giving the proper platform because other people and other countries have to leave some space for them. It's about power structure. So something's got to give. We cannot all have the stage at the same time. So maybe sometimes some of the greater countries should step down and let the indigenous countries and communities get the platform to speak about solutions.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for bringing up funding. Nothing comes from nothing. And if we always ask women's groups, indigenous groups, youth groups to do the work for free, you know, it's struggling on the side of a very heavy workload at the same time. It's a good one from Iceland, you marked.
Yeah, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said here about participation in politics. And I'm just going to give you one quick example of what has been happening in the sort of environmental movement recently. I, as a minister for the environment, went to an informal meeting of the EU ministers in July last year in Slovenia. And I met 6 ministers there who were all from, you know, green parties, and, you know, 4 of them had been leading environmental NGOs before they became ministers. They were sort of picked up from the street and put into that position. I am one of them. And that's why I'm saying, keep on pushing the agenda, moving the line further and further, and try to also get into the position of governing.
Thank you all for really good food for thoughts and action on how do we create a green, sustainable, and just labor market. And both what the Nordics have done, can do, but also what we can learn, what you can learn from other countries in the world, and what you can give. So now we're moving over to the section that I like all of this, but, you know, kind of now we're going to get to the commitments, which I always find is great. So we've come to this, so that we have a joint commitment to action for the Generation Equality Action Coalition number 4 on climate justice. And that one will later today be handed over to the executive director of UN Women, Seema Bahous. And just to be clear, and before I give the floor to Minister Annette from Norway, who's also the chair of the Nordic Council and who would be handing it over, but to succeed with the green transition and a gender perspective, it just must be embedded in everything we do climate-wise. I'd also say in everything we do. And women in all their rich diversity must be given that equal access to decision-making. But I'm really happy to give the floor to you, Minister Annette, who you in 3 minutes will tell us about this great commitment and what you're going to do to make sure that it happens. And then I'm going to turn to the rest of the panel for comments as well.
Thank you, Katja. It really is a great pleasure for me as the chair of the Nordic Cooperation to confirm that we are finally handing over a joint commitment to Executive Director Seema Bahous later today. And this is joint commitment under the Generation Equality Action Coalition 4, Feminist Action for Climate Justice. In the commitment, we recognize that climate change is one of the most pressing challenges in our time. It threatens people's livelihoods, homes, food security, health, as well as access to clean air and water. Unfortunately, we know that climate policies have been lacking sufficient and actionable gender equality insights. The gender perspective must be embedded in climate action to strengthen the effectiveness of green transition initiatives within the labor market, within the energy sector, transport, construction, and food producing sectors. This includes promoting equal access in decision-making processes on climate action to gain the important contributions of underrepresented people and women in their wide diversity as experts, decision makers, consumers, carriers, educators, and stakeholders. The Nordic Council of Ministers will, in line with our Vision 2030 of becoming the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030, seek to advance learning and advocacy on how climate action is strengthened by promoting gender equality. In this way, climate change adaptation and policies can become fully successful and long-lasting. This is, Katja, a 3-year commitment, and our aim is to promote the interconnections between climate action and gender equality. We will develop and share knowledge on this in international corporations, alliances, and advocacy. So later today, my State Secretary Gry Haugsbakken, who is with you in New York today, and the rest of the Nordic ministers will meet UN Women's Executive Director, Ms. Sima Bahaus, and hand over the commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot to the team who has negotiated this. And I think it's very strong that the Nordics come out with this this together. But one thing is what you do jointly. Another thing is also what are you going to do individually to really push this? So I'm going to give you each a minute and a half and a bit, and if if it's really big commitments, you can get 30 seconds extra. So who wants to start? What are you committing to do when you go home to get that, to move away from gender blind or gender with gender covered eyes and open them and really take action? Gudmundur.
Yeah. No, I'm not the Minister for Gender Equality in Iceland, so I will pass it on to the minister. No, I'm just kidding. But what I think is really important in the statement that we are delivering is that we are actually taking this step that we have been talking about here to marry climate change action and gender equality. And I mean, in Iceland for many years now, we have had when we are forming or creating formal committees, boards of state-owned companies, etc., there has to be a gender balanced board. And what I want to see in Iceland as well, and we don't have perhaps a political consensus on this, but that this also should apply to the private market, because that way we will get at least 40% on the boards of companies represented by women. And that would be a huge step forward. And this is something that I want to fight for, and well, my political party has done for quite some time. So this is one of the things that I would say, but specifically with regard to climate change, it is to make sure that all legal bills, the budget, etc., takes both of these issues into consideration at the same time, because it is essential, as we have discussed here today.
Great, thank you. May I jump to you, Minister Sólvit from the Faroe Islands?
Yes, thank you. What we're trying to do is that we have both as politicians, and we also have other public bodies who work on ensuring and strengthening representation, female representation in these areas that have been historically more male dominated. This is both in politics and in what we will now try to do and turn our focus on the private sector as well. We still have a way to go, a long way to go really, before we have equal representation, but we know that if we are to succeed in achieving our goals with regards to climate change, it's a necessary thing to do. It's essential that we focus on gender equality, especially in the energy sector. And as I said before, in the field of science, because we need equal representation because we know it drives innovation, and diversity leads to better solutions, and really just provides better decision making, really. So
that's your commitment to do that.
Well, yes, and that's what we're trying to do. Because I said we've had these public bodies who've done the work, started the work, but we haven't reached our goal yet.
Great, thank you. Eva from Sweden.
Yes, I commit to a green and gender equal Nordic region. This is very important what we do today and this evening. I look forward to and I commit to work together with all of you on the green transition, where we also see an integrated and equal and socially sustainable Nordic region. And I promise to push hard for and work very hard to get reforms in place that can accelerate the green and gender just transition. And there's a lot to do, I promise you. It's also fantastic work to really be able to shape a better future for all. And finally, I will say that in June this year, Sweden will host a very important UN meeting. It's Stockholm 50+. Sweden is hosting it together with Kenya. And we will, of course, have a gender perspective included in all these discussions. And I promise, of course, to see if we can take something out of CSW to strengthen that perspective even more. And I really want to say welcome to all of you. I really hope that we can see represented governments from all over the world, that you will be in Stockholm together with us. So welcome, and I really commit to what we are doing today. This is so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trine, you already said that you were going to go for, you didn't use the word quotas, but you actually said that you were going to push women's leadership.
I think it's a good signal that we are here today because it's one very important step. And I think the most important thing we can do is to open our colleagues' eyes back home, because this has to be all over. As I said before, I'm transport minister. I work with green solution all the time. But I think transport ministers in all governments needs to have that perspective, and also other ministers because they work with the same. So it has to be in the machine room, not only on the thought level, and that's important. And then. There was a good point about that the COP it's mostly men participating, and I think it's interesting that we are here at the UN women's meeting, and we take climate in, but do the COP meeting take women in? I think that's interesting, and I think we can, if we stand together and have a Nordic push, I think we can make something happen. Yes, thank you.
Good idea. Naaja.
Thank you. Well, I think it's important to step a bit away and say, you know, if we do not act now, the future will hold unrest and natural disasters and food shortage, because this is the end game when it comes to climate change. And what got us here is business as usual. So what we really need is to undo that and take some new ways. In Greenland, in my program, government program, sustainability is very much key. Renewable energy, waste management, responsible mining are some concrete efforts being made. And what brought that about, I think, is that my premier was very focused on ensuring a diverse leadership in the government. So not only are we biological gender 50-50, but he has also made sure that there are diversity in terms of age, regional background, ethnicity, as well as gender. And I think this diversity really is what can break this way of doing business as usual. We need more people around the table who are different from each other. So that really makes us better as a whole.
Thank you very much. So business as usual got us to where we are today. The future cannot be business as usual. It has to be very different, and it has to be not only very diverse, but also very inclusive. Thomas, Minister Thomas from Finland.
Thank you. In the government, I think the most important thing I have to do, and we all have to do, is to remind our colleagues about gender mainstreaming, about taking into account genders when making decisions overall, and also considering climate change. That one thing. The second thing is to give information, to tell about the climate change, to tell everyone that it is a gender issue. I woke up this morning when my phone rang. I thought at 6:30. I thought it could have been a colleague that had something important to me. So I answered. The message I got was, there is no climate change. What are you doing there in New York? And at least it is not caused by human, and it is not a gender issue. My answer was and will be, the climate change is happening, and it is a gender issue. And I think when we're speaking about just transition, I have to say I think this one was a lost case. But in any way, we have to give information. We have to tell people about what is happening, what we have to do, but all the decisions also have to be just, and we have to have an acceptance for what we are doing.
And what are you committing to do?
I am committing to give information, to tell people about this, and to remind my colleagues in government to have this gender mainstreaming in every decision we make.
Good.
On behalf of Focus, which has 49 Norwegian women's organizations and groups as members, and cooperate with women's organizations in the global south. So we speak for maybe 1 million women. I commit to continue leading by example. We started working on this issue in 2010 when COP for the first time in Cancun had mention of gender in its conclusions. That was the first time. We have had the feeling that we've been standing in the forest calling out and only hearing our echo. We now see change. So I want to give credit to Annette, who's sitting back in Oslo, and to the new government, because they're actually listening. We're not standing in the forest anymore, yelling and hearing our echo. And that is a change. So I commit to continuing to push for changes in frameworks at COP, at CSW, at national level, and being the civil society watchdog who does not only stand on the outside barking, but who wants to be let into the room to have discussions so that we move forward jointly and together, because we all want the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Annette, what do you commit to do and do differently?
I must say I'm in politics because I want to ensure everyone equal opportunities, and we know that the climate change are going to increase social differences, create poverty, create social differences when it comes to countries and also within genders if we do not act from a political point of view. So I think that my clearest commitment must be to still ensure that Norway takes its part and takes a role in including the gender perspective and climate action in all our policy, in the domestic policy, in every sectors, and also in our foreign policy and in our development policy. And the most important thing there is, just as Gro said and stated, we have to include and involve civil society and include them at the table and listen to them, because they are the ones who know the situation on the ground, and they have the best advice on what we as politicians should implement and do.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And one thing that I'm kind of just going to throw out there as simple suggestions. When you come home, when you go home from New York, or kind of when you go out of the offices where you sit now, if you haven't already, sit down with your climate minister. And I hope all of you have done it. If you haven't, this is about time to sit down and say, how do we do this? How do we do it together? Because one thing about CSW is it's all the ministers of gender who are here, but we're discussing climate change, biodiversity, environment, but they're not here. So let's take the messages home from here and sit down. So that's one. The other one is the COP27. You know, if you can affect that and make sure that all your country's delegations show and lead by example, and make sure that the women in those delegations also are at the table and not just out with the young people demonstrating, that would be awesome. And then, you know, kind of in the discussion about the labor market and the lifestyles, you get in trouble when you kind of say that we might have to tax meat or gasoline or kind of some of that. But, you know, there will be fights. If we have to save this planet, we have to have some fights. And you're going to take some of them. So just a strong encouragement to that. And then kind of, I'm not going to mention money, but nothing comes for free. But so thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for all what you have already done. And everybody here and online, both participants in the panel, but also watching. And even more, thank you for everything that you are going to do even more, even faster, even more fabulous, and even more furious in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. We count on you individually to do the right things, but also in those system changes that we need. And that is also collectively, as you have set out an ambition to do, to make the Nordic region a leader in this and stand united around it. So very much thank you for doing that. And you are the privileged ones. And, you know, you would never see me moderate without quoting Pippi Longstocking. So, you know, when you are strong, you need to be kind, you need to be good. And this is the time. It has been said, we don't have time to sit on our hands as our planet burns. Climate change is bigger than election and re-election. It is life and death. So I hope you all remember what the hashtag was. Hashtag Nordic equality. Please make some noise. And I am going to send you off with a tweet. Moving from gender blind to gender just, Nordic ministers commit to stepping it up for hashtag climate justice. Hashtag Nordic equality, hashtag CSW66, hashtag get on with it. Thanks a lot.